I'm Shelley Raven, 34, and I built my consulting firm from the ground up while supporting my husband through grad school and two failed startups. For years, I handled our bills, hosted his family, and stayed gracious through every backhanded comment. But when they humiliated me at a dinner table, laughing, calling me out of my league, while my husband sat in silence, I made a choice that changed everything. Ever been dismissed by people you showed up for? Betrayed by the ones who should have had your back? Tell me your story in the comments. You're not alone. Before we dive in, let me know where you're tuning in from. And if you've ever drawn a line and said, enough, hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, respect, and reclaiming your power. What happened next might surprise you. I'm Shelley Raven, 34 years old, and I built everything I have from scratch. No trust fund, no family name to open doors, just grit, timing, and a refusal to be small. For years, I showed up for a family that barely tolerated me, thinking if I gave enough, they'd eventually see me as one of their own. But when my sister-in-law laughed in my face over dinner and called me out of my league, something shifted. Because what she didn't know, I owned the building we were sitting in. And what happened next made it impossible for them to ignore who I really was. Let me back up. I met Ethan my senior year of college. We were both finishing undergrad at NYU, him in political science, me in business. He caught my eye because he was wearing a wrinkled dress shirt and reading The Economist in a crowded coffee shop like he was prepping for the UN. I asked if the seat was taken. It wasn't. That was the start. We started dating right after finals. We were both broke. Like, splitting pasta boxes and grocery store wine broke. But we were also ambitious. Ethan had just been accepted into a graduate program at Columbia. I had turned down a corporate offer to start my own business, consulting for small nonprofits on donor strategy and digital engagement. Everyone said it was stupid. No safety net, no clients lined up. But I had a spreadsheet, a work ethic, and a habit of waking up before sunrise. Ethan was charming, kind, the type of person who remembered your dog's name and how you took your coffee. He was also, I would later learn, the black sheep of a very old, very rich Connecticut family. His parents lived in a stone house older than the Constitution. His mother hosted charity luncheons where people actually wore hats. His father was a semi-retired lawyer who still got calls from senators. And his sister, Claire, had that effortless, casually cruel way about her that some women develop when they've never been told no. The first time I met them was at Thanksgiving. I wore a navy dress and brought a homemade pumpkin pie. Ethan had warned me, they can be intense. That was an understatement. His mother greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and said, "Oh, you're the consultant." How charming. Claire gave me a once-over and said, "I love that you don't care about labels." So refreshing. Still, I smiled. I'd worked with tougher donors. The next few years were a blur of work and late nights. My firm started picking up. Word spread. I got my first long-term client, then 3 more. Meanwhile, Ethan struggled to find footing after grad school. His startup, an educational tech app, burned through its seed money in 8 months. I helped cover his rent, and his phone bill, and his student loan interest when the deferment period ran out. I never held it over him. We were a team. When he proposed, it wasn't a surprise. We'd been living together for a year by then. He said he wanted to build something with me, just the two of us. I believed him. His family congratulated us over a stiff dinner at their country club. His father offered a limp handshake. His mother asked if we'd considered a prenup, just to be practical. Claire was worse. She leaned in and whispered, "You must be thrilled. This is a huge step up for you." I didn't respond. I was used to being underestimated. We got married in a small ceremony at a botanical garden in Brooklyn. His family offered to host something bigger at their estate, but attached a list of conditions so long it felt like a contract. I politely declined. My parents, school teachers from Pittsburgh, cried through the whole thing. Ethan held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. For the first 2 years of our marriage, I worked constantly. My consulting firm expanded into corporate social responsibility. I hired 2 assistants. Ethan bounced around short-term contracts. Every time he landed something, it would fall apart within 6 months. Bad leadership, unstable funding, poor market timing. I picked up the slack. Quietly. Consistently. We still lived in the apartment we'd started out in, 850 square feet, 2 flights up, no elevator. His mother once stepped inside and said, "It's very bohemian." Claire refused to visit. "I'm allergic to old buildings," she said. When Ethan offered to host Thanksgiving one year, his parents suggested a more appropriate venue. He didn't push back. I began to notice how little he stood up to them. It wasn't overt, more like a quiet deferral. He'd avoid confrontation by changing the subject or giving vague answers. At first, I thought it was politeness. Then I realized it was fear. Still, I stayed gracious. I sent holiday cards. Remembered birthdays. Donated to Claire's pet charity, even after she spelled my name wrong in the event program. I showed up again and again, thinking my consistency would earn me a seat at the table. By year 4, my firm was turning a steady profit. I restructured, scaled down my clients, raised my rates. I started investing slowly, strategically. Real estate mostly. Quiet deals, nothing flashy. Ethan was supportive in theory, but he never asked for details. I think he preferred not knowing. We hosted Christmas that year. His family declined, again. So I invited my staff, a few close friends, and the couple upstairs who always brought homemade cider. It was cramped and loud and perfect. That night, as I was cleaning up, Ethan said, "They'll never see what you've built, you know." I didn't answer. I wasn't building for them. By the time year 6 rolled around, we were living parallel lives. Ethan had taken a full-time position teaching political science at a local college. He liked it. The schedule worked. But the salary barely covered half of our rent, let alone expenses. I never complained. I just adjusted. Quietly. We took a few vacations, one to Vancouver, one to New Orleans. His family never asked where we went. They only invited us to events when it was convenient or optics-based. Claire got engaged to a hedge fund heir named Brandon. The wedding planning took over every conversation. When Ethan asked if I wanted to be involved, I said, "I doubt they want me to be." He didn't argue. Still, I stayed cordial. Showed up to the engagement party in a rented dress and smiled through Claire's jokes about finally joining the real tax bracket. When someone asked what I did, Claire cut in with, "She runs a boutique non-profit thing. Very niche." I nodded. "Yes, it's niche." That's how we cleared just over $2 million in contracts last quarter. She blinked. I excused myself to get another drink. And that was the moment I knew. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I didn't need them to see me. I'd already built the life they assumed I couldn't touch. I just hadn't told them yet. The first time I noticed Claire wearing something nearly identical to what I had worn the month before, I brushed it off. She showed up to a birthday dinner in a blazer that looked suspiciously like one I'd worn to a family brunch, the same slate gray with cuff sleeves, the same slightly oversized cut. She'd paired it with a designer bag and heels, then made a joke about how she was embracing business Barbie. Everyone laughed. At first, I thought it might be coincidence. But then it happened again. Same style tops. Same gold chain I'd worn to a conference, suddenly appearing in her holiday photos. Then came the phrases. "Let's circle back," she said to me once, after a family lunch when I offered to help with cleanup. "I'm in Q4 mode right now." She said it with a wink, like it was all a game. I wasn't flattered. It didn't feel like imitation. It felt like mockery. It only got worse from there. During one dinner at their family estate, Claire launched into a long story about some guy she was dating at the time, before Brandon, who couldn't stop talking about impact investing. Then she turned to me and said, "Shelley, that's your thing, right? Social stuff with a money twist." I smiled and said yes. That was one way to describe a decade of professional expertise. Her mother sipped her wine and asked if I'd ever considered doing something more stable now that I was married. "Nonprofits can be such a drain," she said, as if I hadn't heard that line before. That's how the comments always came, wrapped in civility, just sharp enough to cut. "Must be nice not having to worry about taxes yet," Claire joked during a Christmas toast. We were sitting around their formal dining table, 20 feet of polished mahogany and inherited silver. I mean, real ones. Like when you have actual assets. She smirked at me over her champagne flute. Ethan caught my eye and gave me a small shake of the head, like I should let it go. So I did. I always did. That was the dynamic. He buffered. I stayed quiet. His family got to pretend they were gracious hosts, and I got to swallow the lump in my throat. They assumed I was playing house. Claire once called our apartment a starter nest in front of her friends. Her mother described my work as admirable, the way someone might describe a local bake sale for charity. They never asked about my clients, never showed interest in what I was building. But they never missed a chance to bring up Ethan's degrees, his potential, or the internships he'd turned down. By then, my firm was generating 6 figures a quarter. I had 3 part-time staff, a digital strategist, and a calendar booked out for 6 months. I still kept that mostly private. Not because I was hiding, but because I knew they weren't listening. Once, at Easter brunch, Claire asked if I ever thought about going back to school to finish something more formal. I was holding a mimosa and a deviled egg and, honestly, just trying to survive the small talk. I said I was fine with my current trajectory. She laughed and said, "You're so brave." I'd be terrified not having a fallback. My fallback, at that point, was a $200,000 line of credit and an exit plan I could have sold tomorrow for double that. But I didn't say anything. I didn't need to prove it. I just wanted to finish my eggs. Ethan was used to them. That was his excuse. "That's just how they are," he'd say when I told him something rubbed me the wrong way. "They don't mean it." When I suggested maybe we should talk to them directly, he got uncomfortable. "It's not worth the drama," he'd say. "You know they respect you in their own way." In their own way. That phrase did a lot of heavy lifting in our marriage. After Claire got engaged to Brandon, the wedding planning consumed everything. Every text, every dinner, every family group chat update. Claire invited me to a few things, the dress fittings, the menu tastings, but always in a way that made it clear I was optional. Once, she sent an invite that said, "Feel free to tag along if you're free, totally casual." It was a sit-down tasting at a Michelin-starred restaurant. I went. I sat through 2 hours of her and her mother debating caviar types. I said nothing when her mother leaned across the table and asked Brandon what he thought about merging trusts once they were married. Brandon, in turn, asked me if I did communication stuff. I said yes. That seemed easier than explaining what stakeholder engagement meant in multi-platform fundraising architecture. Afterward, Claire posted a group photo on Instagram. She tagged everyone at the tasting except me. I showed Ethan. He said maybe it was an oversight. She probably just forgot. She hadn't. It wasn't just Claire. His parents began referencing future plans in a way that slowly started erasing me. His father once mentioned a family trip to the coast. He'd booked a villa for 6. I asked who the 6 were. "Oh," he said, slightly startled, "you and Ethan, of course. Brandon and Claire and my sister and her husband." That was 7. I wasn't on the list. They started framing the family house as something Claire and Brandon might take over one day. I asked if that meant the property was being passed down to Claire. Ethan said he wasn't sure. "It's complicated," he said. "It's not like they're writing anyone out. It's just estate logistics." It was never said directly. No one ever told me I didn't belong. They didn't have to. It was in the way his mother asked me to bring dessert, not cook. The way his father handed me a check at Christmas for something nice, even though I'd brought personalized gifts for everyone. The way Claire introduced me as Ethan's wife, she does this cool nonprofit stuff, super niche. Then changed the subject. I started noticing how little Ethan defended me in those moments. Not because he agreed with them. I don't think he did. But because he'd spent a lifetime surviving that household by keeping his head down. It wore on me. I found myself shrinking a little every time we visited. Laughing a bit too quickly at Claire's jokes. Letting the harmless comments slide because I didn't want to seem petty or defensive. I told myself it didn't matter. That I knew who I was. That their approval meant nothing. But that wasn't entirely true. When you've worked your whole life to build something from nothing, being treated like an accessory hurts in ways you don't always admit out loud. And maybe the hardest part was that Ethan didn't see it. Or maybe he chose not to. Because as I watched my business take off and my presence in his family fade into polite invisibility, I started wondering who, exactly, I was building all this for. And how long I could keep pretending it didn't bother me. It started with a forwarded email from Ethan. Subject line: dinner, mom's planning something. The body was just a reservation confirmation and a message from his mother that said, looking forward to a proper family evening. Let's all make an effort to be on time. I hadn't been asked if the date worked for me. No one checked my schedule. No mention of why we were meeting or if there was an occasion. Just an instruction. The restaurant was one of those names people drop to signal status: dark wood, private wine lockers, no prices on the menu. I knew it well. I'd had a quiet stake in it for the past 6 months. Nothing major, just enough to sit in on quarterly calls, get early reports, and keep my ear to the ground on expansion opportunities. I liked the chef's vision. I liked the margins more. I didn't tell Ethan about the investment. Not because I was hiding it, but because at some point, he stopped asking what I was working on. We arrived 5 minutes early. Claire and Brandon were already there, drinks in hand, holding court near the bar. Claire was in a white pantsuit that looked like it had a comma in the price tag. Brandon was talking about ski season and a private heli tour he'd booked. I greeted them politely. Claire air-kissed my cheek and said, "Oh good, you made it. Wasn't sure if this place would be your scene." I ignored the comment. Ethan smiled tightly, said hello, then went off to find his father. I stood alone for a minute, watching as Claire told the hostess we were with the Raven party. Her voice carried. A few heads turned. We were led to a long table near the back of the dining room, half booth, half chairs. His mother was already seated, flipping through the wine menu like it was a board meeting. She looked up when she saw me and said, "Shelley, good to see you. Hope the traffic wasn't too bad." I said it wasn't. She didn't ask anything else. The waiter came around, offered sparkling or still. No one looked at the price list. They never did. Claire ordered a bottle of vintage Pinot like she was selecting a podcast. The waiter nodded and disappeared. So, Brandon said, leaning forward, "How's the project?" "What was it again? Fundraising, right?" I explained that my firm handled strategic donor advising and cross-platform campaign management for social impact organizations, and that we'd recently expanded into public-private partnerships. He blinked. "Huh, that sounds intricate." Claire jumped in. "Shelley's great with that kind of stuff. Very detail-oriented. I always say she's like a human spreadsheet." Then she turned to me, eyes glinting. "Did you get the memo about the dress code? I was worried this place might be a little formal for you." The table laughed. Her mother smiled faintly behind her wine glass. Ethan said nothing. I reached for my water. My hands didn't shake. The food came out in small, elegant courses, each more ornate than the last. No one offered to split the check or even hinted at covering our portion. Claire ordered a second bottle of wine. Her mother asked the sommelier for something off menu. Her father talked about politics like he was on a panel. I kept smiling, nodding, letting it roll off me. Then, halfway through the main course, it happened. Claire raised her glass and said, "This is fun. We should do more of these." She glanced at me. "Assuming you can budget for it." I froze. Ethan looked down at his plate. Brandon chuckled. "Come on, babe." Claire shrugged. "I'm just saying, some of us grew up with this stuff. Some didn't. It's not an insult. Just reality." Then she leaned in and said, "Don't worry, you can Venmo me later. This place is way out of your league." The laughter wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to make the back of my neck burn. Enough to make my chest tighten, not from embarrassment, but from clarity. I looked at Ethan. He didn't say a word. Just then, the maitre d' approached the table. He stopped beside me and said, "Good evening, Miss Raven. Your private room is ready whenever you are." The entire table went silent. His voice was calm, professional, loud enough to be heard by everyone seated near us. My mother-in-law's fork froze midair. Claire blinked. The maitre d' gestured politely. "Shall I have them bring the wine?" I looked at him and smiled. "Yes, thank you. And let Chef know the risotto was perfect." He nodded and disappeared. Claire's mouth opened, then closed. Ethan looked at me, really looked, for the first time that night. I stood up, adjusted my napkin, and said, "I'll be in the back. You're welcome to join me if you can budget for it." Then I walked away. The private room was set with fresh flowers and a clean linen tablecloth. My name was on a small card at the head of the table. I sat down, folded my hands, and waited. No one followed me. Not immediately. I heard them talking softly in the main room. Heard Ethan say something I couldn't catch. Claire laughed again. This time, it sounded less certain. Eventually, the waiter brought the wine into my room and asked if I'd like dessert. I said yes. The chocolate torte, if it was still on the specials list. 5 minutes later, Ethan slipped in. He closed the door behind him. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "About what?" I didn't look at him. "This." I looked at the wine. "Would it have made a difference?" He didn't answer. I finally turned to face him. "They think I'm here by accident. That I got lucky. That I married up. And you let them." His face tightened. "I didn't know they'd. You didn't need to know. You saw it." He sat down across from me. Quiet. Then he said, "I'm sorry." I nodded. He started to speak again, but I stopped him. "You don't need to fix it. It's already done." The waiter returned with dessert. He set it down gently, then left us alone. We sat in silence. Not angry. Just changed. Because some moments redraw the lines. Not with screaming or ultimatums, but with a quiet click. A door closing. A spotlight shifting. They laughed at me in a place I partly own. And that tells me everything I need to know about who they are. And who I am. That moment in the restaurant hit like a dropped plate, sharp, sudden, impossible to ignore. But what came after was almost worse. The silence. The way everyone suddenly found deep interest in the wine list or their untouched dessert. Claire fiddled with her napkin like she didn't know what to say. Ethan's mother adjusted her pearls and murmured something about needing to check on her car service. No one said sorry. No one acknowledged what had just happened. No one followed me into the private room except Ethan. We didn't talk much during dessert. He poked at his creme brulee and said, "That was unexpected." I nodded. He didn't ask for details. I didn't offer any. When the check came, he paid without speaking. On the ride home, the air between us felt brittle. I looked out the window while he tapped the steering wheel like he was waiting for the right combination of words to unlock a reaction. Finally, he said, "You could have warned me." I turned to him. "Warned you?" He kept his eyes on the road. "That you were involved with the restaurant. That you'd arranged all that." "I didn't arrange anything," I said quietly. "I'm a passive investor. The maitre d' saw my name on the list. That's it." He didn't respond. The silence stretched for blocks. I counted streetlights until we reached our apartment. When we got inside, he dropped his keys on the counter and went straight to the bedroom. I stayed in the living room, turned on a lamp, sat down, and started unpacking the whole night. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. It was something quieter than that. A dull ache that had been building over years. Not just from Claire's constant jabs or his parents' indifference, but from the way I had allowed myself to become small in the spaces I'd worked so hard to enter. I thought about the dinners I'd cooked for his family, the birthdays I'd remembered, the carefully selected gifts, the invitations I'd extended. I'd offered kindness they never returned. And I told myself it was just a matter of time. That they'd eventually see me, understand what I was building. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, I'd allowed myself to be minimized. I'd played nice to earn their acceptance. I'd edited down my achievements to make them comfortable. I'd smiled through every dismissal, every dig, every "you're lucky to have Ethan." And not just with them. With him, too. Ethan never asked what a client retainer looked like. Never sat down with me to go over projections. He'd never once said, "Tell me about your day." I'd chalked it up to differences in personality. But now I wondered if part of him didn't really want to know. If he didn't want to see how much I'd grown while he'd stalled. I went into the bedroom around midnight. He was already in bed, facing the wall. I climbed in silently. Neither of us spoke. The next morning, he made coffee like nothing had happened. Poured me a cup. Asked if I had calls lined up that day. I said yes. He said, "I'm teaching a full block, won't be home till late." That was it. We didn't talk about the dinner. Or his sister. Or the moment the maitre d' called me by name and the entire table froze. But something had shifted. I felt it in the way we moved around each other, politely, carefully, like people who no longer knew where they stood. That week, I found myself avoiding the apartment more than usual. I booked co-working space uptown. Took meetings in person. Stayed out late under the pretense of networking events. I didn't want to be home. I didn't want to sit next to a man who hadn't defended me. I kept thinking about what it meant that I'd had to prove myself that way, in public, with strangers watching, just to be treated as someone worth basic respect. And I hated that I'd needed that moment. I thought about all the other rooms I'd walked into where people had underestimated me. How often I'd let that slide. How often I'd mistaken endurance for grace. That night had snapped something into focus. I didn't want revenge. I didn't need a scene. But I couldn't keep living in a version of my life where I was the quiet one in the corner of my own story. So I started making changes. Small ones at first. I updated my website. Added new testimonials. Raised my rates. Clients didn't blink. I pulled back from Ethan's family group chat. No more emojis. No more birthday reminders. I took my name off the shared Amazon account. I had dinner with an old friend from grad school, someone who used to joke that I'd run circles around VCs one day. He asked how my business was doing. I told him everything. He didn't look surprised. "You always had it," he said. "You just kept playing small around the wrong people." That landed. By the end of the month, I'd started researching other properties to invest in. A boutique hotel in Asheville. A co-working space in Santa Fe. I didn't tell Ethan. Not because I was being secretive, but because I was building something that didn't need his permission to exist. One night, he came home and said his mother wanted to host another dinner. Just the core family. Would I come? I said, "Why?" He blinked. "Because you're my wife." "And that's enough now?" I asked. He didn't have an answer. We didn't fight. There was nothing left to argue about. But I could feel the gap between us widening. It wasn't dramatic. Just real. And quiet. Like a door you didn't notice had closed, until it was already too late to reach for the handle. I didn't make a big announcement. There wasn't some dramatic fallout or final confrontation. I just stopped participating. The next invitation came a week after the dinner. A casual family brunch at the estate. Claire sent it through the group chat like nothing had happened, followed by a series of champagne emojis and a photo of her new shoes. I didn't respond. Ethan asked if I wanted to go. I said I had work. He didn't push. A few days later, another message came through, this time from his mother. "Holiday planning. Thinking of hosting early this year. Let me know what dates work." I ignored it. When Ethan brought it up, I told him I had other plans. Which was true. I had meetings, new clients, and speaking invitations. I'd recently been asked to join a panel on women-led investments in impact philanthropy. I flew to Chicago for a week to meet with 2 prospective partners about launching a joint venture. My schedule filled up faster than I could manage. I stopped declining politely and started simply not responding. I wasn't angry. I was done. His mother called me about 2 weeks into the silence. Her voice was measured, soft, but sharp around the edges. "Shelley," she said, "I'm sensing some distance lately. Is everything all right?" I told her I was busy. She paused. "You know, it's okay to feel things, but I do think you might be taking that dinner a little too personally." I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I said, "You know what word people use when they want to avoid accountability?" She didn't answer. I gave her the answer anyway. "Oversensitive." She sighed. "I just think you should remember, we're family. We all say things we don't mean sometimes." "No," I said. "You say things you mean. You just don't like what it looks like when I stop pretending it's fine." She didn't call again after that. Ethan tried to stay out of it. He didn't take sides. He said that a lot. "I'm not taking sides." As if neutrality was noble. As if being married to someone and failing to stand up for them was some kind of peacekeeping strategy. I told him once, during a quiet dinner at home, not choosing a side is still a choice. He didn't disagree. He just looked tired. Like he was hoping I'd drop it and go back to being the version of myself that made things easy. But I was tired too. I started attending events alone. I stopped asking if he wanted to come. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. At a networking gala, someone introduced me as Shelley Raven. She's behind that donor acceleration model everyone's been trying to reverse engineer. A man from a venture capital firm asked if I was looking for a buyer. I wasn't. Not yet. But it felt good to be asked. I started spending more time in spaces where I didn't have to explain what I did. Where I didn't have to water it down or translate it into something palatable for people who had never built anything. At home, things got quieter. We still ate dinner together, sometimes. We still said good night. But the space between us had changed. He noticed when I spent weekends out of town. He asked once if I was avoiding his family. I told him I wasn't avoiding anyone. I was just done contorting myself for their comfort. They're just trying to connect, he said. No, I said. They're trying to control the terms of connection. And when that doesn't work, they call it a problem with me. That's when I asked him the question I'd been holding in for months. If you're okay with how they treat me, what does that say about you? He didn't answer right away. He looked down at the table, then back at me. I'm not okay with it, he said eventually. I just don't know how to change it. I believed him. But it wasn't enough. I wanted to ask why he never tried. Why he never pulled Claire aside. Why he never interrupted when his mother made those comments. Why his silence always landed on their side of the table. But I didn't ask. Because I already knew. He'd grown up learning to survive by appeasing them. He had spent years learning to dodge the sharp edges. I had just refused to flatten myself into someone easier to swallow. And somewhere along the way, we'd stopped being on the same team. A few weeks later, Claire sent another invite, this time for a wine weekend upstate. Just the inner circle, she wrote. No pressure, of course. I deleted the message. When Ethan asked if I saw it, I said yes. I'm not going, I said. Just for the weekend? Just not anymore. He nodded. That night, we lay in bed facing opposite directions. I stared at the wall, wondering how many more nights would feel like this, quiet, civil, and slowly unraveling. I wasn't angry with him. I wasn't anything. I'd stopped trying to fix something that required both of us. And the only thing left to do was decide what I was willing to carry. Or let go of. The invitations kept coming, but I didn't respond. I booked a solo trip to Lisbon for a conference. I met women there who had exited companies, built platforms, launched funds. We talked until midnight about risk and power and what it costs to be underestimated. When I came back, something felt clearer. I wasn't going to shrink anymore. Not for his family. Not for him. Not to preserve a version of our life that only worked when I stayed small. So I told him. One night, sitting on the edge of the couch while he scrolled through his phone. I'm not mad at you, I said. But I'm not going to live like this. He looked up. Like what? Like someone who needs to be tolerated. Or explained away. Or softened. He didn't say anything. I stood up. I love what I'm building. I love the version of me that doesn't ask for permission to exist in a room. And I'm not going to pretend that version of me fits inside your family's idea of acceptable anymore. Where does that leave us? He asked. I don't know, I said. But at least now we're being honest. And then I walked out of the room. Not to end things, but to finally stop pretending they hadn't already started to unravel. I filed the paperwork on a Tuesday morning. No ceremony. No announcement. Just a quiet appointment with my attorney to restructure my holdings and legally separate our finances. I didn't tell Ethan right away. Not out of spite. I just needed space to breathe, uninterrupted by his discomfort. It wasn't a divorce filing. Not yet. But I knew what it meant. And I think, on some level, so did he. We sat across from each other at dinner that night, eating takeout from a place we used to go when we were students and broke, and everything felt like it was ahead of us. He asked how my day was. I said, productive. He nodded. Didn't press. A week later, he launched his second startup, a policy education platform. He called it his chance to do something meaningful. I said congratulations, and I meant it. He asked if I'd consider helping with funding strategy. I said no. He looked surprised, but he didn't argue. Then came the emails. From friends. From colleagues. From mutuals we both knew. Ethan mentioned he's raising. Should we take a call? He said you're not involved, but I figured I'd ask anyway. Wanted to see if this is something you'd ever co-sign. Each time, I replied with a polite no. Eventually, the emails stopped. Claire reached out next. A vague message about collaborating on her new project, a lifestyle consultancy for high-net-worth women navigating transitional seasons. She attached a PDF with branding mock-ups and asked if I'd consider being an advisor. I opened the file. Recognized 2 of my old frameworks almost verbatim. I didn't respond. The next time I saw her was at a public event, an art fundraiser I'd quietly underwritten. She walked in late, Brandon on her arm, wearing head-to-toe designer, all posture and shine. When she spotted me near the donor circle, she smiled like nothing had changed. "Shelley," she said, arms open. "You've been so MIA. We've missed you." I smiled back. "Have you?" Her face flickered, just for a second. Then she recovered. "We should grab lunch. Talk about synergies. I think our brands could really complement each other." I told her I'd have my assistant check the calendar. She never followed up. That same month, her lifestyle venture launched. There was a glossy rollout on Instagram, a few media mentions, and a launch party filled with the kind of people who smile at your earrings before they smile at your face. I didn't attend, though I was invited. By month 3, the brand was floundering. Engagement dropped. Her site crashed during checkout because it hadn't been properly stress-tested. One of her partners backed out after an alleged disagreement about direction. Brandon posted less. Still, I said nothing. No "I told you so." No pointed advice. No whispered corrections from the wings. Sometimes silence is the cleanest form of power. Ethan felt the shift more gradually. He started noticing when people he used to rely on didn't return his calls. When invites to the events I sponsored no longer came with a +1. When his name wasn't listed next to mine in program booklets. He asked if I was doing it on purpose. I said, "I'm just not doing it the old way." There was nothing cruel about it. Nothing personal. Just boundaries where there used to be access. One night, he came into my office while I was going over vendor contracts for a new venture, a mentorship network for women in social enterprise. "Are you punishing me?" he asked. I looked up. "No, then what is this?" "This is me protecting what I've built." He sat down across from me. Quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You've changed." "I've stopped apologizing for being who I always was," I said. I meant it. For years, I'd diluted my presence to make others more comfortable. I'd accepted backhanded compliments, allowed my work to be treated like a hobby, my growth like a lucky accident. And somewhere in that accommodation, I'd let go of the woman who once negotiated 5-figure deals from her kitchen table and never needed anyone's last name to legitimize her own. Now she was back. My firm hit a milestone that quarter. We closed a multi-year government contract that positioned us as one of the top strategic advisors in our field. I hosted a private dinner to celebrate. The guest list included senior partners, civic leaders, and the women I used to look up to from a distance when I was just getting started. We toasted with chilled wine on a rooftop terrace overlooking the skyline. I wore the same slate gray blazer Claire once mocked. This time, no one laughed. A few days later, Ethan asked if we could talk. He sat me down in the same living room where we used to eat pizza on the floor and dream about a future we didn't know how to name. "I feel like I'm losing you," he said. I didn't know how to respond to that. Because part of me wanted to reassure him, and another part knew the version of me he missed wasn't coming back. "You're not losing me," I said carefully. "You're just seeing me." And I think that scared him more. Because seeing me meant reckoning with everything he'd ignored. The choices. The silences. The way he'd let his family's comfort sit above my dignity, again and again. I don't know if he understood it completely. But he stopped asking me to show up where I wasn't valued. And I stopped feeling guilty for building a life that made space for all of who I was. His family faded from view. Slowly, then completely. The group chat went quiet. The invites stopped. His mother sent one final message, something about family ties being sacred and hoping I'd find my way back. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I was already exactly where I belonged. I was delivering a keynote on social capital and equity building through small enterprise when I saw him. Second row, off to the side. No announcement. No text. Just there. Ethan. He was wearing the navy blazer he used to save for interviews, the one that made him look a little too formal and a little too young. He didn't fidget. Didn't take notes. Just watched. Carefully. Quietly. It threw me off for a second, seeing him like that, outside the context of our apartment or some family event. In this room, surrounded by entrepreneurs, advisors, and foundations, he looked like someone trying to learn a new language. After the speech, I stayed for Q&A, posed for a few photos, chatted with the event organizers. It was almost an hour before I saw him again, standing near the back of the room, hands in his pockets, waiting. I walked over. He smiled, small and unsure. That was incredible. Thank you. He nodded, looked down, then back at me. I didn't know how much you built. I know, I said. I think I didn't want to know. I didn't respond. I told myself I was supporting you, he said. Letting you lead. Letting you have your space. But really, I just didn't want to feel smaller standing next to you. That landed heavier than he probably intended. I let the silence settle before I said, I'm not angry anymore. His eyes met mine. I'm clear, I added. He nodded slowly. Can we talk? Just talk. So we did. Not that night, but over the next few weeks. In places where no one knew who we were to each other. We met at a park near my co-working space. Then again at a coffee shop I liked because the tables were always a little uneven and no one stayed long enough to get comfortable. We talked about work. About where things went wrong. About how long we'd let silence carry more weight than our intentions. I think I got comfortable being passive, he said. Because I thought love meant letting things slide. Not pushing back. Not interfering. You called it peace, I said. But it was just permission. He didn't argue. For the first time, we weren't speaking in the language of blame. Just facts. Quiet truths. The kind you only hear when you stop trying to win. I told him I wasn't going back to who I was. Not the version of me that kept everyone comfortable. Not the one who explained away cruelty or waited for validation. He said he didn't want me to. I believed him. Cautiously. He asked if we could try again. I said, not from where we left off. Then from where? From equal footing, I said. Where I don't need to shrink and you don't need to hide. He asked what that looked like. It looks like showing up, I said. Not just for me. For yourself. For the hard conversations. For the accountability you skipped when it was easier to be quiet. I can do that. We'll see. And we did. Slowly. Carefully. He started attending my events, not just the big ones with photo ops and catered hors d'oeuvres, but the working sessions. The panels. The rooms where nothing sparkled but the strategy. He asked questions. Not performatively. Earnestly. He stopped forwarding invites from his mother. Stopped asking if I wanted to give Claire's new rebrand a second look. When Claire posted about her sabbatical to focus on self-discovery, he didn't mention it at all. When his father emailed about a family legacy dinner, he replied with a polite decline and didn't CC me. It wasn't perfect. He still flinched when I pointed out how long he'd looked away. Still hesitated when the conversation turned personal. But he didn't deflect anymore. He let it land. And I let him try. One night, he showed up at my apartment with takeout from my favorite Thai place. We sat on the balcony in silence for a while. Then he asked, "Did you ever think about leaving completely?" I didn't lie. Yes. Why didn't you? Because I needed to know if you could see me without trying to contain me. He nodded, then said, I'm trying to learn how to be in your orbit without expecting it to revolve around me. That mattered. Not because it fixed everything, but because he was finally naming the thing we'd both avoided. We didn't move back in together. Not right away. He stayed in the apartment. I stayed in my space. We started dating again. But differently. I stopped editing myself. He stopped pretending neutrality was kindness. He asked to see my business pitch deck. I walked him through it. He said, "This is brilliant." I said, "I know." He didn't laugh. Just looked proud. For the first time, it felt like we were sitting on the same side of the table. Not as rescuer and rescued. not as wife and ornament, but as two people willing to unlearn what they thought love was supposed to look like. Maybe trust doesn't always come back loud. Sometimes it returns as a question, are you ready to meet me where I am now? And sometimes the answer is yes. But only if you're both willing to stay awake this time. A year later, I bought the restaurant outright. Not for the symbolism, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't cross my mind when I signed the papers, but because it made sense. The chef wanted out of the day-to-day, the investors were restructuring, and I already knew the numbers inside out. It was clean, solid, profitable. It was also the room where everything shifted. Now I go there often. Sometimes for client lunches. Sometimes for solo dinners, when I need a moment between calls to breathe. The staff knows me by name. The maitre d' always sets my table with a small glass of sparkling water before I even sit down. No one rushes me. No one watches me like I snuck in through the service door. There's a framed photo near the back, opening night years ago. I'm in the background, almost out of frame, standing near the coat check in a borrowed dress, back when I still thought being included was the same as being respected. I don't look at it often, but it's there. A quiet reminder. Ethan and I still speak. We're still figuring it out slowly. The space between us is different now, wider, but more honest. We know who we are to each other. We know what it costs to unlearn patterns we were taught to survive. He shows up when it counts. He asks questions now. He listens without flinching. But the part that matters most? I'm not waiting for him to catch up anymore. I move forward at my own pace. The last time his mother reached out, it was a forwarded invite to a charity gala I was already sponsoring. No greeting. No context. Just a line that said, "Any chance you'll be there?" I didn't reply. She saw me that night, across the ballroom. I was speaking to a group of donors about institutional partnerships. She waved. I nodded. That was it. Claire's third attempt at a brand launch quietly folded. She stopped posting for a while. Brandon resurfaced as a strategic advisor at some crypto-backed venture. I didn't bother to Google it. Every so often, I hear that they've tried to get on lists for events I help fund. Tried to connect through old contacts, drop my name, claim proximity. It doesn't land. Not anymore. I never needed revenge. That was never the point. What I needed was something simpler, to build something they couldn't touch. To stop asking for a seat and just by the table. To know, deep down, without performance or apology, that I belong in any room I choose to walk into. Sometimes people ask how I got here. How I went from side-eyed +1 to principal investor. The answer is boring. I worked. I stayed steady when I was ignored. I got better while they underestimated me. I learned when to speak, when to wait, and when to walk away. And most importantly, I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided I wasn't worth listening to. There's power in silence. But there's more in clarity. And when the two meet, that's where legacy begins. These days, I mentor young women coming up in the field. Some of them remind me of who I used to be, sharp, driven, soft-spoken in all the wrong places. They tell me about the rooms they're trying to enter. About being passed over, misjudged, undermined. I tell them, let them underestimate you. Let them laugh, if they need to. And then go build the thing they said you didn't belong in. One of them came with me to the restaurant last week. First client meeting. She wore a navy dress and brought printed packets even though everything was digital. Nervous, but sharp. The waiter greeted us. "Welcome back, Ms. Raven," he said. She looked at me. "They know your name here." I smiled. "They should. I own it." She laughed. The real kind, surprised, delighted. And in that moment, I saw it land for her. Not just the restaurant. Not the numbers. The ownership. The quiet power of building something so solid, you don't need to announce it to be felt. That's the part no one teaches you. How to hold your ground without raising your voice. How to stop knocking on doors and start designing your own. And how sometimes, the best closure is no longer needing to be seen, because you already are. Whether they acknowledge it or not. Whether they ever catch up or not. Because the truth is, the room they once laughed at me for sitting in, I own it now. And I'll never ask for a seat again. If you've ever had to prove your worth in a room that was designed to overlook you, you're not alone. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to distance yourself from family to protect your peace? Let me know in the comments. And if this story resonated, hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about setting boundaries, owning your power, and walking away without looking back.